And we're happy to do this travel festival, travel skills talks throughout today in this venue. If you're interested in our tours in the Edmonds Theater, a few blocks down, most of you know where that is, we'll be describing how we approach each of these countries through the tour program that we do. I want to welcome also those who are streaming live on Rick's Facebook page today. Welcome. And I want to remind everybody, whether you are on Facebook or here live, that everything in our travel center, as usual in a travel festival time, is on sale, 20% off. Should you choose to sign up for a tour today, tomorrow, or through Monday, you get $100 off on that tour, but you have to do it by then. Those of you who are streaming live, the promotional code for 20% off is Festival, and we'll ship it to you. For 25 years, I have been traveling to France with Rick Steves, teaching him the simple joy of French cuisine, baguette with brie cheese, simple bottle of wine, and introducing him to some of my favorite people, hotel owners and restaurateurs, while Rick, in turn, has taught me the art and science of guidebook writing. It's been a great collaboration. Our France book, the first of our co-authored books together, is now in its 22nd edition. I had brown hair when it started. So did Rick did. Today we have 4 guidebooks. It takes 4 guidebooks for us to cover the country of France. We have a phrase book, maps, Paris, and the country as well. And 4 different tour itineraries, by the way, for our small group tours. Today I'm going to be focusing on the Best of France book that you see front and center on the left side. Our guidebooks are updated every year. That's what I do for about 4 months out of my year. All right. Let's get situated first. So here is the country of France within Western Central Europe, right here. If you look at the size of it and the scale, it's about 80% the size of Texas. And you'll notice that it's central in Europe. So the climate suffers not from the extreme heat of the south of Europe, nor from the extreme cold in the north. It's a mild place. Things grow well here with good soil. Food, wine, it works. This also means that France makes a good travel destination most of the year, summers and even winters included, depending on how you choose. To give you a sense of scale, here's Paris in the northern corner of the country. To Madrid or to Rome, it's about the same distance, and that's pretty close to going from Seattle to San Francisco, for those of you from the West who can relate to that. Europe is not that big. You can get around and you can make connections that you could not before, thanks to high-speed trains and others, and other cheap intra-European flights that really make getting around Europe easier than ever. But there's a reason why you came here today. You want to go to France. You better, or you're in the wrong class. Why would you want to go to this country? Well, let me start by explaining that reason. From Paris in the north to Nice in the far southeast corner, France is a place of gentle beauty, where the play of light transforms the routine into the exceptional. It's a beautiful place to go. There's also no other country in Europe that carries the variety of scenery, culturally, historically, this combination, and natural scenery that France does. From the north that I just showed you in pastoral villages to the south, rock-clinging, sun-baked villages, lavender fields that mark the south of the country, offer travelers a top-to-bottom variety of scenic experience unrivaled in Europe. There's 2 distinctly different coastlines in France. The Atlantic, on the western corner, I should say, with more of a rugged sort of Olympic Peninsula kind of shore to look at. The southern border of France is of course dominated by the Mediterranean, which harbors small villages like this and sun-drenched harbors, giving you an entirely different seaside look at this country. And if it's the highest peaks in Europe that you want to come face to face with, you must travel to France. For Mont Blanc is in France, about 800 feet taller than our Mount Rainier. There are 3 mountain ranges that mark France, as well as 2 different coastlines. The Alps, as I showed you just before, to the southeastern corner. The Pyrenees form the border with castles like this. The Cathar castles are most famous, but also high mountain peaks, snow-covered peaks on the western southern border of Spain. And throughout the southern central part of the country, the mountain range nobody ever has heard of, the Massif Central, creates grand gorges that those from Arizona would be impressed with. This is Europe's playground for rafters and kayakers and mountain climbers and such. France is their outdoors playground. And for you, it's a scenic beauty and backdrop as you travel. But France is more than just a pretty face, ready to smile at you from corner to corner. The cultural diversity that's possible in this country for you to experience matches its scenic diversity. You can start in the northeastern corner of the Alsace, where the Germanic traditions carry strong, where beer outsails the pace of wine, and people drink it in liter sizes, and sauerkraut with sausage is on everybody's main course dish in the Alsace. This is France. To the northwestern corner of the country, where the people you're likely to tickle on the side of the road or play with or get to know look more freckled and red-haired and Irish, don't they? Then they look French. Well, that's because Brittany is more Gaelic, really, shares more in common maybe with Wales and Ireland, parts of Scotland, than it does the rest of France. To the south, and where their favorite dish are buckwheat crepes, topped with just about anything you can imagine. To the southwestern corner, where the look and the feel is undeniably Spanish and Catalan, where the main courses that you can find are also very Spanish, like paella, as they say it in this corner of France. So every time you go from one corner to another, you're near a border, this country of France takes on the traditions of the bordering country. To the southeastern corner, where that heavily, near Italy, influenced devil may care, what me worry, easygoing attitude, and influence cuisine-wise and shop-wise is on display in stores and restaurants throughout the French Riviera. All of this in one country, and I didn't even mention the Basque country, or Burgundy, or other parts of France as well. It's there for you to enjoy, and there's probably no greater metaphor, or symbol really, of the diversity of sights and food for you to see in France than the cheeses that are possible. There are over 400 different cheeses available in France. Your goal is to try every one of them. We try it on our tours. We don't get very far. And it reminds me that the beauty of French cuisine and the joy of French wine isn't it that this cuisine is better than other cuisines. The wine and the foods are not, undeniably not. What they are different from region to region. The French have a tradition and a history of matching the food with the wine that makes it so utterly different that when I travel with my French buddies from Burgundy and we go over to Bordeaux, they need the menu explained as much as I do, because the local specialties are so different. And what is the best wine to go, or whatever the drink is with this food. It's a joy. But France is more than just a good meal and a good bottle of wine and pretty scenery waiting for you to see as well. Historians enjoy going to France. We can trace, in many ways, France is the yardstick, is a measure, really, of human achievement. For in France, travelers can trace the whole of European history, from ancient prehistoric cave arts. The greatest number of prehistoric artifacts are available for you to see through 4 different caves today, where you can see paintings from 15 to 20,000 years old ago, to Roman ruins that rival those available to see in Italy. And in France, in medieval times, the French cultivated this Romanesque architecture, creating lovely chapels like this in Brancion in southern Burgundy, later to be followed by the Gothic period of architecture, invented really here in France, erecting cathedrals on a scale never seen before and filling their walls with brilliant and colorful stained glass windows. It told stories of the Bible and reminded people of how they should live their lives before they could read through the symbolism of stained glass. All of these historic monuments and movements available for you to see in France continued through the 15 and 1600s when French architects set the trend for cities throughout Europe, making chateaus like Versailles and all these Vaux-le-Vicomte that I'm showing you here, and all the chateaux of the Loire Valley, the envy of the rest of Europe. In the 1800s, French artists, France really gave birth to the Impressionist art movement through people like Claude Monet and his garden here that you're staring at Giverny. And the best example of why I love traveling to this country is you can go see what inspired this art form and then see the product of it. An hour from Paris are Claude Monet's Gardens in Giverny. In Paris, you can see the water lilies at the Orangerie Museum, his other works at the Orsay Museum and such. To go see the source and see the product is a remarkable opportunity and a joy of traveling in France. To the late 1800s and early 1900s, where the French were some of the first to learn to construct on a large scale with steel, making train stations and towers like the Eiffel Tower, like that have never been done before. All of this you can see when traveling to France. And many Americans would have gone there long ago because they know this, or they knew this, were it not for the French. They fear this, and I want to deal with this head on, and I'm not going to say that the French are smiley and happy-go-lucky throughout the country. It varies by region. Most Americans' opinions of the French are formed by their trips to Paris, and a long time ago probably, and probably with an experience with a French waiter. Exhibit A. These people are serious. Their tips are included in the bill, so they don't get any more tip. French don't tip, okay, at restaurants. Remember that lesson. You Americans will. The French won't. If they do, it's a very small amount. So it doesn't matter if he's nicer to you. He's trying to get his job done and move on. And the sooner you understand that and don't judge him or this culture by American standards, you see, the better your trip will be. If you order white wine with your steak, this is the reaction you're going to get from that waiter. He doesn't think he heard you right. And he probably wouldn't serve it to you even if you demanded. He might just quit. I used to say that if you asked for a glass of ice cubes to go with that white wine, then he probably would quit. When I give wine tasting classes or little courses on tours that we do, I like to say, whatever you're tasting here, nobody can tell you what you like. You form your own opinion. Nobody can tell you what you like, except the French. And they do so on a regular basis. And enjoy that. Celebrate it. Don't resist it. Ask the waiter what his opinion is or her opinion is, your server. Live with the local recommendations. They've been raised knowing that a steak should be complemented by a good red wine, maybe from Bordeaux or Pinot Noir from Burgundy. And to them, that's close to religion. Don't fight it. Release yourself. Allow it, right? All right? And to the French, who are a more serious, formal people, partly probably because 2 world wars fought chiefly on their soil would make them that way, walking down the road, smiling and saying hello to people you don't know is the first sign of senility. And I mean it. That's not a joke. This is an American tour group. French people. Americans, French. Okay, they're not mean. Sure, you're going to run into a postal clerk or an impatient hotel owner, but don't draw conclusions for the rest of the French from that, right? If you go through the back doors, we like to say, and you use a lot of the connections, what's huge in our book is trying to make, is easily as important as describing a historic site to you or a meal or a restaurant in our books, is trying to help you make connections with the locals. Right? And so if you read our books, you'll see a lot of first names used. That's really unusual in France. They're very formal, so they use Monsieur and Madame. It took me 20 years to be called Monsieur Steve rather than Smith. Monsieur Smith with some of my closest friends, hotel owners, etc. Anyway, if you go through the back door and you slow down and you're not a hurried American traveler, judging the French on their terms, not your own, you'll come face to face with cheese farmer Jerry Garcia here, right? You'll meet people like this. Your memories of your trip will be dominated by these people, not those waiters or let's call them surly postal clerks in post offices. Bringing children establishes a great connection to the locals. And France is a great country to travel with children as well. Not just because children are popular anywhere, but they go out of their way, like in the Loire Valley here, to create these mini monuments. Rick has 2 children. They're grown now, 22 and 24. I have 2, 10 and 19. We've raised our guidebooks with our children. And in France, we know this country is well suited to welcome your children. So don't hesitate. It's also a way to establish connection with people in France, is to take one of the locally guided tours, whether you're traveling if you're traveling on your own. If you're with a group, you'll be doing it anyway. Whether it's historic information you want more of, like at the D-Day beaches, or understanding the importance of vineyards to the country, or taking a cooking class, I have found that people are fascinated with this, and these are ways of connecting you with locals, obviously who speak English and are used to dealing with some Americans, and it really does give you a personal insight to the country rather than reading your guidebook about the D-Day beaches. You see, it really makes a difference once in a while to pepper your trip with some of these locally guided tours, whether you're driving or taking a train. And I love the feedback I get. All right. Traveling around France, you have two great choices. And I don't think this is common in Europe. Well, comparing with Italy and Spain, for example, these countries are dominated by big cities. France is dominated by Paris and Nice, and then a lot of rural stuff. So you have good choices, whether you want to travel by train. High-speed trains connect all these cities in France to get you into the TGV is the state of the art in Europe today. 200-mile-an-hour train technology that when you get to smaller towns is taken over with local trains and then buses. And I describe them all in the guidebook to get to even the smallest places. You want a rail pass, almost for sure, because the French have chosen to subsidize the France rail pass more than, say, the Italians do, for example. They're trying to draw you to travel in their country. So they subsidize it for non-French people. Even drivers like to get a rail pass or at least use the trains to go. Maybe they'll tool around the Normandy area in northwestern France for 4 or 5 days. Drop your rental car off. I do this when I research. Hop on the TGV, get to Provence, and then spend another week down there. Don't drive between the two. That's foolish. You'll spend more than you would on the train ticket anyway with gas and auto route tolls, let alone the time lost. And it's an enormous investment of time to drive that distance. So for people who are committed to driving, you'll fine, but you intersperse some train travel in with it. As well as, I mentioned before, these minivan tours that can give you historic looks at the countryside are also great for people who just really don't want to rent a car. These minivan tours provide the service of getting you to Loire Valley Chateau, caves in the Dordogne Valley, vineyards in Burgundy, and the like that you could never reach without a bicycle or your own power or your own car. And you spend the day with a local. Usually these are college students. Their English is very good, and they're driving you around, either just giving you transportation point to point. You've paid them $50 for the day of their time to take you from point A to point B throughout the day. Or they're giving you history as you go, like in the D-Day beaches, and you're getting much more than just the transportation. It varies, and I describe it pretty well in the guidebook, I think. Travel by car works. I mentioned before it's a rural country. 500 years ago, Italy was more urbanized than France is today. Your images of France, I'm sure, are of rural places after Paris. That's why driving works. They drive on the same side of the road that we do, and cars half the size at twice the speed. Well, that last part's a lie. They have really controlled their speed now, and it's actually, except for the freeways, which is 85 miles an hour, but it's controlled access. These are paid auto routes. The safety of driving in France is comparable to the United States now. I don't like driving after dark anywhere that I go in country lanes, so I'd avoid that. That's a good safety measure. But otherwise, the rules of the road are largely the same that we obey. Gas is twice the price, but fuel efficiency is twice as good. My dad just left. I took him to the airport this morning. It's amazing I'm here talking to you today at 6 o'clock. My parents go for 6 months every year. I was raised sort of back and forth between France and the United States. My dad was an English professor in his career and taught at universities in France. He has a car there that gets 46 miles a gallon. His Buick here gets 23. The gas is double. You see it comes out to the same thing. So don't let the price of gas fool you. When you rent a car, do it from the United States if you're going, and rent from a travel agent so you have somebody, you can usually get the same deal that you'd get on your own in case you have problems, who can help intercede because you're all the way over in France, should there be a problem. I always use a travel agent for that. If you're going for 17 days or longer and want to rent the car for that time, you'll save lots of money by leasing. It's like renting. It's virtually the same, and there's 3 or 4 companies that do this lease option to buy. It's kind of like you're winking like you're going to buy the car, and you save the 20% sales tax. But the deal is, to do it, you have to have this long-term agreement of 17 days or longer. I think that's still pretty much the case. Rent a diesel. Diesel gas is a lot cheaper than in France, than regular. And get a smaller car than you think you need. These medieval villages are trickier to drive in than you think. If you want an automatic car, book that well in advance. There aren't that many of them. Right? And they're liable to be the larger cars. And remember, if you're traveling through France, one thing that I do is I rent in the United States before I go if I'm renting on a weekly basis. But 2 or 3 days, one day, rent on the spot there. It tends to be a better deal because the way rates are organized for Americans going, it's this weekly basis that works pretty well. But if you only do 1 day or 2 days, it tends to be more expensive from the United States than if you just rented in France. The average daily rental is like $65 in France for a car for the day. all right? And I do that just the day, maybe all I want is a day on the Didier beaches or the Chateau of the Loire Valley. And otherwise, I want to relax on the trains. That works. You can blend your travel and transportation-wise very well this way. Why you would want to travel by car in France is to travel down roads like this. The country really, truly is beautiful top to bottom. A car allows you then to stop at villages like Pérouge here. That it's not even in the guidebook because there's so many places like this. And pull off the side of the road, have your baguette and your cheese with a view just like that. Your choice, rail or car, they both work well. Hotels are a relatively good value in France. They're rated from 0 to 5 stars. There are very few 5-star hotels. That's a new category. Most 1 to 4, and in our book, dominated by 2 and 3-star hotels, right in the middle of the road. That's what we guess our travelers want, right? Sometimes 1 and 2-star hotels work great. Just be careful. Rick likes to say, lay before you pay on the bed. Hotels like this, they're always centrally located. This is a 2-star hotel. It's about $100 for a double in Honfleur, tax and tip included. Or on the island abbey of Mont Saint-Michel, about $110 now for this hotel with a view right up to the spires of the abbey. I don't want you on the corner of some cul-de-sac in an industrial area. Even if you have points with some hotel chain, do your best to stay central. So as soon as you open the door of your room, you are out within it, except when you want to be lost in Provence at this place. This is €50 a night, so about $58, something like that, for a double room here. Some of these, here's the thing about traveling in France. You're going to spend a lot for rooms in Paris and not that much in the rural countryside. It balances out very nicely. You'll see this. The prices drop significantly when you're away from the Riviera and when you're away from Paris. Be ready for that as you travel. And so splurge in those remote hotels. Go simpler in the cities of Paris and be comfortable, but go to that Chateau hotel that you always wanted to try in the Loire Valley. But forget the 4-star hotel in Paris. That'd be ridiculous. Do you follow me? I think that makes more balanced sense. Simple 1 and 2-star hotels are clean, comfortable, firm beds. 3-star hotels that I list in the guidebook, but not always, but the ones that I pick are, that we choose, I should say, have more ambiance. Sometimes larger rooms, not always. More conveniences, probably for the traveler, to 3-star hotels. And this reminds me, traveling with families. I have this image up just so I can talk about, there are more and more hotels in France. The last 5 years, the trend has been to create rooms for families. So they're rooms that communicate, 2 rooms booked together. They call them chambres communicantes. Or larger rooms like this, almost always with 2 twin beds pushed together for 2 large doubles for families of 4. You'll find this easier and easier to get family rooms as you travel in France today. 4-star hotels are worth trying once in a while. I mentioned before, maybe consider a hotel in the Chateau Hotel like this Chateau de Pré in the Loire Valley. It's remarkable. How many times do you have a chance to sleep in a 750-year-old building? Lovely place, lovely rooms, and the price, this is about $200 for a double. Well, my wife just tried to book us a room in Le Conner for the Tulip Festival for the next weekend, and it was $320. I couldn't believe that. So maybe, it's my sense of expensive is distorted a little bit. Maybe $200 isn't a bad deal. I like to say for every expensive hotel you stay in, particularly if you're driving, stay in a bed and breakfast. That cancels it out because they're a great value in France. Chambres d'hôtes, they're called, and I list them throughout the country in the book. Mostly in rural places, usually you need a car to get to them. Tourist offices, if ever you're stuck for accommodations and you're out of luck, always go to a tourist office. If the hotels are full, there's always a bed and breakfast. Because these are 3 and 4 rooms usually in somebody's home when the kids went to college. They renovated them, almost always with private baths now, not down the hall. And they're lovely places. This one I'm staying at this year, this one's near Rocamadour in southwestern France, just outside of Rocamadour. And it's a 16th century mill house. You actually should spend more, have to stay in such a historic building. But this one's about $75 for a double. And it includes breakfast. And that's important. And I'll talk about in a moment why that's so important, to have breakfast included in most bed and breakfasts in France. Apartments are popular than ever, more popular than ever, particularly in Paris, and now in Nice, for people who want to slow down, because you have to rent them on a weekly basis, almost always, Saturday to Saturday. Really, you can't imagine, and this is not going to save you much money on the daily cost of a hotel room if you have 2 couples sharing like a 2-bedroom apartment or you're just doing it on your own. Where you save is through food purchasing. And it's a joy or rent a house in the countryside, by the way. The gîtes and homes, we do that with the house that we own in Burgundy, on a weekly basis as well. There are something like 15,000 homes for rent in France. And now with the internet, it's pretty easy to find them. Usually when Americans own them, they charge more because they think that you'll pay more because you can rely on them because they're Americans. Do a good internet search. Try the Gite de France, G-I-T-E de France website. It's listed in the guidebook. Those are almost all owned by French people, and you'll get a sense of the realistic cost of a home rental in France. But again, weekly basis. And I mentioned before, breakfast alone. Hotel, the average breakfast will set you back about $13. Right? And it's usually not included in the price of the hotel room. In a bed and breakfast, it usually is. Not always, though. That's one thing about France. There's exceptions to every rule possible, right? Anyway, just breakfast alone, and then also just being forced to rent an apartment, when you rent an apartment or a house, to go shop with the locals. That's good fun. Cook your dinners once in a while. Maybe that's what you like to do. You'll save money certainly that way. But it gives you more flexibility to come home at the end of a long day and not have to go out to dinner. That's where people save money, and I think that's one of the joys of renting homes or apartments. Food-wise, you should figure about, you have the handout, hopefully, on my talk on France today. I'm not sure what color it is that you have, but I figured about $45 a day for food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's gold, is that the color? Thank you. $45 for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that works. I try it every year, and that certainly works. And almost a third of that is breakfast, right there. Lunch, for me, can be, or dinner. These takeout places, they're called charcuteries. They're great. This is when you want to eat higher on the food chain than a restaurant, but you don't want to pay the prices. You can get things to go and microwaved with a plastic fork and eat them wherever you like, except in your hotel room. This is one particular thing the French hoteliers would love it if I told you right now, which is they hate it when you picnic in the rooms. We Americans love to do that. But you should know throughout this country, these are small family-run hotels. They aren't Hilton hotels, and they spend a lot of time, and they're very proud of their rooms. And carpets that are dirty and crumbs. French food tends to be crummy with baguettes, and red wine makes a red stain. And for them, that's a big cost and a big headache. So if you could picnic in their breakfast areas, in the backyard, or somewhere other than your room, they would appreciate it. All right. Enough divergence. Cafes offer a great option for dining in France, for eating out, particularly with kids. Here you can eat most of the day. Usually, even cafes shut their kitchens from about 2 till 6. Be ready for that wherever you're traveling. If you don't get in by 2 and sometimes 1:30, it's too late. Cafes, though, are places where you can just get one course, like a salad for lunch. These are $10 on the average. Tax and tip included, no tip needed. It's like going to Oregon and not having to tip. How about that? That's the nice thing. The tax, the value-added tax in France is imputed into the price of things you buy, whether it's a hotel room or food. Know that in advance. In Italy and other countries, it's not always the same. It's inconsistent throughout Europe, so don't assume it's the same. And if you want a tip when you're traveling in France, I think that's fine at a restaurant because they probably had to work a little bit harder with you than with French people who don't tip. So max 5%. There you go. So those guilty people can tip 5% if they want to, but you don't have to. Bistros, it's a joy listing restaurants for travel in France, and they're good values. Cafes, again, are really good with kids. When you just want one course and that's all you want, even if it's all a soupe à l'oignon, French onion soup, or just a salad for dinner, you can go to a cafe anytime, and they're everywhere, and get just that. At restaurants like this bistro, you're expected to order a main course and not split it with your partner. You may split a salad, something like that to start it, but the main course is more formal, like you would think of normal restaurants in the United States, I think that way. And the big deal these days, it used to be menus, 3-, 4-, and 5-course menus, one of which was a cheese course, one dessert, starter, et cetera. Well, the French have caught on both to the cost issue of that and the weight gain issue. So now menus that exist, set menus, are commonly 2-course. But many people just do the plat du jour, and that's what you're looking at there. This didn't used to be the case. Vegetables and main course all on the main dish. It's an inexpensive way of going. When my wife and I travel, she often does this plat du jour, and I get the menu of the day. And then she steals my salad and my dessert. But we sort of mix it up. Do you see what I mean? I may get 3 courses and she 1. Think that way. But once in a while, try the menus. And the guidebook, the restaurants that I list, my wife is involved. She went to cooking school in France, and I'm proud of that. And so she covers the high end. Rick still likes dorm food, so he covers the low end budget places to eat, and I'm right in the middle. You get 3 of us in this book. You really do. The range of possibilities. I bet there's more restaurants listed in the France book than any of our other guidebooks, partly because of that. And when you want to splurge, allow yourself to splurge once in a while. For that menu that I was just mentioning, lovely restaurants, it's really a joy to be able to list places like this, where the first course looks like this. And this is the first of 4. And this is a €40 dinner. That's at the Le Pommier restaurant in Bayeux on the D-Day beaches. 40 euros. You don't have to spend that much. I chose to do that this night. That's about $52. Tax and tip included. I was at Ray's the other night on my parents' anniversary, and it was $32 for my main course alone, on top of which I had to tax and tip as well. So you start to see, particularly outside of Paris, eating well and higher again on the food chain works out pretty well. Once in a while, allow yourself that splurge. He or she who comes home with the most money doesn't win. No, you don't. This is not a place to cheap out. Let your taste buds, go first class once in a while. Then go second class or coach in England, right, where it doesn't matter that much. I stole that line from Rick. All right. It's a joy to list restaurants with great views on the beaches and cliffs like this on the French Riviera. I go out of my way, and I hope you use them as guidelines for about how much you should spend, and find your own places too. Please don't just go to the places I recommend, but at least you know about how much you should be spending in a restaurant in this area for this kind of food. Use it as a barometer that way. For many people, all this planning and preparation is just too much, and they'd rather share their experience and bottle of wine with 24 other travelers and go on a tour. We think that's great. That's why we have tours. But some of you are determined to share that bottle of wine with yourselves and to go it alone. That's why we write guidebooks. We love it. Whether you want to go with a small group or on your own, we think we're ready for you, and we love it either way. And that's the joy of working with Rick Steves. We hope that you will use some of the local guides. This is Malcolm Miller in Chartres, Malcolm Miller. We hope you'll make use of some of these people, again, to pepper your trip. We do, on our tours, use these local guides where they are particularly interesting to us. So we blend them in with our guides. This is Sabine in the corner here pointing out a site. She's one of our Europe to the Back Door guides, leads or used to lead the whole tour. But our guides will fit together in a big picture what the local guides at the Louvre Museum, maybe Versailles, at a cave in the Dordogne Valley. We'll paint the big picture and let them focus in on the details. And it's a joy in France, particularly, to have a group purchase. This is how you can get to some of those 400 cheeses. We'll buy 10, 15 cheeses each lunch that we do together, so you'll get to at least 30 or 40 of them before the trip is over, right? And group picnics are a joy on the tours of France. It's the way we organize our tours is about half your time is organized and half your time is alone. We like that. We don't want to dominate your time. Part of it, the value of taking our time to make sure you have enough time in each city, that we don't just schedule 3 hours for Avignon or Arles, something like that mainstream tours tend to do, or even 20 minutes sometimes, so they can put it on their itinerary that they went here. We want you to have time. If we're going to stop somewhere, we're going to take time for you to enjoy the place. We have 4 different itineraries I mentioned before. London tour, well, that's England across the water, but we have a Paris city tour. I'll be describing these at 1 o'clock this afternoon at the theater if you want more information, really, and I'll get through these quickly. The Heart of France in 11 days, the Best of France, Paris and South of France in 15, and then Vineyards and Villages of the East. I love this tour, in 14 days. That's not a wine tasting tour, but it is dominated by the wine country from Champagne through Burgundy, Alsace, Provence, and the French Riviera. Let's get going. Let me give you a snapshot view into this country that I love so much and demonstrate what I think is so great about the variety of sights that you can see in the country today. Here is the hexagon, as they call it in France, the country. Atlantic here, one more time. Mediterranean down here, Alps about here, Pyrenees. You can see it right there. We're going to go in this counterclockwise fashion. You can go the other way if you want to. I've had people ask me before, can you do this tour in the other way on our own? So I feel obligated to remind people it's not a one-way country. I like going this direction, and print's only reason, really, and I almost do my research this way every year, is because it's a close hop from Paris, and I get over jet lag here in Honfleur, whereas my favorite stop in the Alsace is a long distance the other direction, even though there's a new train connection. It's easier to move that short distance to get out of the city. I save Paris for the end, the biggest city in France, obviously, for when I'm accustomed to the food, the pace, the time zone, etc., rather than tackle it when I'm half coherent and jet lagged, you see. So starting just outside of Paris, then we'll end in the city. About an hour outside by train, bus, and combination of bike if you want, or car. Here's the place where Claude Monet spent the last 40 of his years of his life as he was going blind with cataracts, cultivating his art and his flower, and creating art that Americans and people worldwide just enjoy. Being inspired to create this impressionist art that he did that really formed the basis of modern art today. It's only an hour outside of Paris at most, and there are a couple of hotels I list here. What a lovely way to get over jet lag if you want. I'll encourage you, if you don't want to go any further, to consider that as your first night after you get out of the plane. But I love Honfleur. This is another hour on. So total with a stop in Giverny, which you can be kind of half coherent and enjoy the gardens. There are no paintings of his to see in the town. It's just really enjoying where he lived and the gardens that he created. But Honfleur makes a great first stop. This is a town of about 10,000 people. Here's that play of light in the early morning on a small harbor just at the mouth where the Seine River meets the Atlantic Ocean. Charming half-timbered architecture, colorful place, where the main church, the Church of St. Catherine, is built by shipwrights and 100% out of wood, except for just a very little bit of stone. The town is named Honfleur, H-O-N-F-L-E-U-R. So remember, they don't pronounce the H. Get used to that. Honfleur is what we'd say. You could be standing 5 minutes outside the city of Honfleur in front of the sign and asking, pardon, monsieur, madame, où est Honfleur? They won't know what you're talking about. Sometimes these differences in pronunciation are very subtle, sometimes to them, though they're always they're very important. So remember, if they don't understand you, it's not that intentional on their part. The sounds that they make in their language are quite fine. All right, in Honfleur, Claude Monet's mentor, Eugene Boudin, lived. And on the beaches, he was inspired also to paint scenes like this. He was a mover of the Impressionist art movement. The museum dedicated to Eugene Boudin, many Americans have never heard of course, in Honfleur, makes a lovely art stop on your first stay in France. Eating on the harbor at night is what you must do when you're in Honfleur. What a great way, again, just to relax. And there are cafes for just that salad if you're tired, four-course dinner places, the whole surrounding that little harbor that I showed you before. An hour and a half south of Honfleur, still in Normandy, lies the 75-mile-long stretch of the D-Day beaches. Today looking beautiful, as you can see here. I'm walking across Omaha Beach. But then, 65, 70 years ago, it was quite a different story. This is a destination that most Americans want to go to, understandably, and it's one that many don't have allocated enough time for. So I'm here to remind you, you want 2 nights and 1 full day at least, because the events of June 6, 1944 and after are so well presented, and you as Americans are involved in this history, that it's never surprising to me, but it's always that how interesting I can stay year after year going to visit the same places. They renovated them, they changed them. The monuments that you can see are stunning. I recommend using a local guide. I list 10 in the book now. For a day trip, if you don't have a car, perfect, because they'll get you around the beaches. It's almost impossible without a car otherwise than using these minivan tours. Even if you have a car, consider this for a good history lesson. Some of these guides that I list are great historians. Others are more into the context of the war and present more of a whole Normandy perspective on things. There are French guides, German guides, no Americans, and British guides that I list in the guidebook. All right. You can start, though, using our guidebook that Rick and I did together and do the guided tour from our guidebook. That works perfectly well as well. And here is the town of Arromanches. We're really sort of the seed of the largest amphibian assault ever launched that also launched the liberation of Europe, June 7th, when they arrived, 1944. Here in the small town of Arromanches, you can see out into the bay, and even here washed up onto the shore because it's low tide. 115 big blocks of concrete were towed across at night and sunk with 17 old battleships overnight to create an artificial harbor that allowed the Allies, the Canadians, whose involvement is often overlooked, and it was very important. Americans and British and French were involved in this landing and allowed them to offload supplies, guns, munition, food, jeeps, gasoline to support the paratroopers, the landings inland, and move inland, and ultimately succeed in the liberation of Europe. It's astonishing. These big blocks of concrete were supposed to disappear after a couple of years. They're still there for you to see today. The memories, there's something like 150,000 tons of debris still along the D-Day beaches. If you've seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, that's a great introduction, if you can take it to what you're about to see here. From the guns along the shore, traveling along the 75-mile corridor, along the beaches, the Atlantic Defense Wall of Hitler, the museums that bring it all to life in English so brilliantly and so effectively. So much has been found and put on display for you to see that it paints the picture of what happened in these events in a way that I know you'll appreciate and you'll want to allocate a full day for. I like saving the American Cemetery for last. It's a powerful footnote on a trip to the D-Day beaches. It's about central in the beaches, where about 10,000 Americans at Omaha Beach are buried. And this is, if you can see this, this is Preston Nyland, one of the Nyland brothers about whom the movie Saving Private Ryan is about. Anyway, it's a powerful site, not just because of how beautiful it's done and how serene it is, but also because they've created a visitor center at the American Cemetery on Omaha Beach that presents the daily lives of the soldiers, and it gives it a personal link to you. It's very, if you've been there before, go again, because this is only about 3 years old since they built this visitor center, which is kind of a museum. But what it does is it gives you this personal look into these soldiers' lives. Their letters home, through letters home, video on about Dwight Eisenhower, and then videos of the soldiers themselves as well. It really creates that personal link. And then you can get out, visit the cemetery, walk down those steps to the beach below, where this focus of the first of the landings of the D-Day beaches were, and be left alone. Find time, even if you're with a guided tour, for a little bit of time on your own when you're on the D-Day beaches. You'll want it. Bayeux, the city about 6 miles inland, makes a great base, although I do list hotels on the beaches in the D-Day region. Bayeux is a lovely town, and it's about 15,000 people. It has a brilliant Norman Gothic cathedral, in which this tapestry that described an entirely different amphibious invasion of 1066, when William the Conqueror went the other direction from France and invaded England to beat Harold and create this problem that the French and the British would endure for hundreds of years, like who's running which country. William the Conqueror didn't speak English, but he ruled England. British kings would rule France for a period of time who didn't speak French. This wouldn't be resolved until the 100 Years' War. This tapestry, they call it, is really a woolen embroidery. It's the Bayeux tapestry, it's called. It was unfurled in the cathedral or the church that I showed you before. And it's really a stunningly well-presented. And after seeing the D-Day beaches, you say, well, maybe I'll just move on. This can't be that interesting, a tapestry. I mean, that's what I said the first time before I saw it. It is worth your time to see this tapestry. It is brilliantly displayed, and the history lesson that it gives. They say we learned almost more from the Middle Ages from this 75-yard long woolen embroidery than any other one source, because so much is displayed for you in this tapestry. An hour and a half south, then, of the D-Day beaches. I'm still in Normandy here. These are the 3 big sites, Honfleur, D-Day beaches, and for over almost 900 years, pilgrims have been making their pilgrimage to this famous abbey, the island of Mont Saint-Michel. And it's actually about 800 years, where you can make your own pilgrimage today, but arrive after 5, or you run headlong into this almost Tijuana-like mess of people. So spend your day maybe in Bayeux this day. It's only an hour and a half away. There's transportation for public transit users, by the way. There's a brilliant, relatively new service that connects Mont Saint-Michel with Bayeux. It's a little minivan operated by one of the hotels that anybody can take, that I list in the book. If you don't want to drive, take it. It's about a $50 trip, I think, something like that, one way. And you can spend the night on the island and come back the next day, or just keep moving on. The train, bus connections to the island are really tricky, I'll warn you. Everything else I've talked about before works perfectly fine. Mont Saint-Michel's a headache, unless you're driving. And it's going to be more of a headache, and I'll show you why momentarily, but arrive after 5, the same street. Before, after. Isn't that amazing? And then tour the Abbey late in the day or early the next morning. Your experience is entirely different if you this is the kind of thing I learned from Rick. Think about how you're traveling. There must be a better way to do this. He would always say that to me. There must be a better way to do this, or another way of doing this. Sleep on the island. There are 5 hotels that I list, and they are not that expensive. And then come down because it's floodlit every single night. Don't just stay on the island. You got to come out to see its most beautiful aspect. It's like the Eiffel Tower, much more beautiful at night than at day. And even though I think Mont Saint-Michel is pretty exceptional in the daytime, spend the night on or near the island. Here's the exciting news on Mont Saint-Michel. They are getting rid of the causeway that was built in the 1800s in front of the island. If you've been there, you know what I mean. Causeway allowed initially trains to go right to the island for tourists. It's like a landing strip almost, but then a roadway was built on top of it. They're replacing it as I speak with a pontooned bridge. By the time you get there, you can no longer drive to the island. You will be parking remotely and then taking rubber-tired transit onto the island. So be ready for that transfer. Pack things into a small bag. That's a wise move. It's exciting because it's a small pontoon bridge, or a thin pontoon bridge, I should say, that will link the 2-kilometer distance across the bay to the island and allow the water to circulate finely, again, all around the island and create its original effect. Like you're seeing here, if you will, but I was able to creatively avoid the causeway in this image that I took. All right, one night's good for Mont Saint-Michel. You're out the next day, 4 hours east and south to the happy hunting grounds of the French kings and queens in the 1500s and 1600s, the Loire Valley. You're looking at the Loire River here that runs east to west through the Loire Valley and separates north from south officially in France. Not climate-wise, really, but that's how they designate officially north to south. This is the chateau in the town of Amboise. This is my favorite city to base yourselves out of for exploring the Loire Valley, Amboise, A-M-B-O-I-S-E. And it's a town of 10,000 people. It works perfectly comfortably, easy to navigate by car or train and bus. I'll explain that. This is one area to consider chateau hotels. I mentioned this before. The Loire Valley, there's 1,000 chateaux built from the day and age when the French kings and queens had more money and more time on their hands than they knew what to do with. And the Loire Valley is close enough to Paris for a relatively short trip in the 1600s. Hunting was good here, so it became the destination of many a well-known and well-connected person. You today can sleep in their homes because 1,000 chateaux that's too many to turn over to tourism. I list, I think, 12 in the guidebook that are worth touring, that are open to the public, furnished and the like. I'll show you some of them in a moment. Most of them, many of them, not most, but many have been turned into hotels, some even youth hostels of all price ranges. Don't assume that it's going to be expensive because it's old. I list, one is a bed and breakfast. Again, if you want the full-on effect, you'll spend more. But boy, here's the place to do that in the Loire Valley. In Amboise, in and around Amboise then is a good base because in the city there's the chateau to see if you want to, but this is also the site where Leonardo da Vinci spent the last 3 years of his life. The Renaissance king of France, Francois I, invited him up when Italy was just a mess in 1516. And Leonardo had his hand in a variety of chateau building projects in the Loire Valley. And this is his home where he lived, the Clos Lucé, where you can experience many of his inventions of this Roman candle of ingenuity. 500 years ago, he was designing things like a space capsule, tanks, and all sorts of amazing things that have been recreated from his drawings. You know, he drew left to right, or right to left, pardon me, in this code manner, and they've recreated about 40 of his inventions in the basement of his house in Amboise. A worthwhile sight for almost anybody to see who is a fan of Leonardo da Vinci. Getting around to see the chateaux that are near, this is why you're here. If you're not interested in chateau, don't come to the Loire Valley. I find the cities and towns perfectly fine and nice, but really not worth a detour otherwise. You're here for the castles. Make the most of Amboise. Good. Leonardo da Vinci was here. But otherwise, let's go see the chateau. This is one place in France that biking makes a good idea. But it's a bad idea unless you've been biking a lot lately, because it's at least 1 hour one way to the nearest chateau from Amboise. Lots of bike rental places and lots of readers and bikers think this would be really cool. I've always dreamed of it. Let's get on that bike and ride all day. Okay? What you can, there are solutions to that. You ride one way and your partner rides back, or there are even shuttle services that will shuttle your bike for you and things like this. But be aware of the limits of your energy. And my advice is to ride your bike in Burgundy. That, not just because our house is there, but of course everything's better in Burgundy. No, because you can go for 5 miles, 1 mile, and get right into the vineyards from where you rent the bikes, and you can go 50 yards, and you've had a great experience. To get to a chateau in the Loire Valley is more of an exercise. Here is the first accomplishment that you want to make. This reminds me, though, too, looking at the Chateau of Chenonceau. This is the most important one for you to see. It's the grand and glorious one, the first example of a palace in the Loire Valley built not for defensive purposes. Remember when the invention of gunpowder made its way to Central Europe and Western Europe, all those medieval stone castles became useless because they just blow them up. So now castles are really, even though they call them chateaux, whether they're defensive or palaces, the French use the same word, so it's confusing sometimes. This is the first in the Loire Valley that was built just for pleasure. Look at this, arcing over the Cher River, which reminds me of the Loire Valley. It's far more than just the Loire River. It's a region of rivers. And it's really, truly worth your time and effort. It's so well presented. They have iPod audio tours of 1 hour and 1 hour and a half. They have iPod audio tours for children. We do a tour in our guidebooks. So you don't have to rent the iPods if you don't want to. We even recommend both because we think they're complementary to each other. And the 1 hour audio guide iPod tour is sufficient. This reminds me, many monuments in France today, that looks like my slide advancer, have what they call audio guides that are often included and sometimes a bit more price if you want to rent them. And they are self-guided tours. You punch a button and then you listen for the description of the room or the porcelain pot that you're looking at or the chair or whatever it is. You can spend days with these things. Right? And sometimes I'll tell you if I think they're worth it for this site, and I'll tell you if it's really probably not worth it. In this case, it is well worth it. So start here. It opens at 9. Get here at 8:45. It's going to take you 15 minutes to walk to the chateau from the gate. Bikes, fine. It's an hour ride from Amboise. Minivan tours do a great job in this area getting you around the Loire Valley. I list several companies that do this at a reasonable price. Otherwise, take your car. There's no history given on these minivan tours, by the way. It's really just transportation and a nice French person to talk to for the day. You can do a half day or full day. It's up to you. And they do different circuits, and they combine different castles together. So start here. Trust me. Get to Chenonceau. Sleep in Chenonceau. I list hotels here. I love the little village around the castle. If you really want the pure sort of Loire Valley effect, sleep in Chenonceau. It's only 10 minutes by car from Amboise. You choose. Get here early. It opens at 9. It's beautifully furnished. The gardens are beautiful. The castle will bowl you over. And then move on for lunchtime to the King's Castle. This is where Leonardo da Vinci had a big role playing in designing. This is Chambord, the Castle of Chambord. This is the King's Castle, 440 rooms, 365 chimneys. It took 1,800 workmen, 15 years of nonstop work to build this in the 1500s. You wonder why there was a revolution eventually in France. Think about that investment. I think if Barack Obama did that, the Republicans would be all over him. We'd all be all over him. In this day and age, it was accepted as normal. Why 365 chimneys? Simple facts like this make all the difference. And Rick and I spent a week in the Loire Valley this last summer, and he really, when he comes with me, which he does almost every year, he focuses on the history and the walking tours, and I can update other things because he's with me. I don't have to do it all in this area. He added a lot of good content to this is the Chateau of Chambord, I should tell you, Chambord. And it's good at lunchtime because it's so big. But the why so many chimneys question, I think, is a good one to answer. Well, first of all, you need so many rooms because you're a king, and when the king has friends over, he brings a lot of friends with him. So if the king of Poland comes, he's going to have 600 or 700 people with him, something like that, or a lot. Now, I can tell you when I was in Paris, living there the last time, George Bush Sr. was president when I was living in Paris last time, and there was a G7 conference, and one of my friends worked for the embassy in Paris. He had to find 900 rooms for the American contingent. Make that analogy with Chambord. If you're going hunting on a weekend, you're going to do some business and talk, but have some fun too. Thus the size. 365 chimneys because hunting was the popular sport. Leaves fall off the trees. All the tree forests in France are deciduous virtually. You can see the animals better, but it's cold in the winter. Fireplaces. Right? All right, move on. I'm a chateau fit for a king, as I mentioned before, and if you're lucky, almost every day at noon there is a jousting match that you can see from May, I think, in through September at Chambord. Another good base in the Loire Valley. It's about an hour and 20 minutes south of there in the town of Chinon. For an entirely different look, and that's why I'm including this today. I would change bases so I don't have to drive back and forth between these two places and then tour a different chateau from this little town of Chinon, Chinon, on the Vienne River, because this chateau is medieval, from 500 years older than that of Chambord, for example. This was built, its most famous residents were Eleanor of Aquitaine, and Henry II Plantagenet, and then later Joan of Arc, and Richard the Lionheart. Not bad. France, Eleanor and Henry ruled a kingdom from Scotland to Spain, to the border of Spain, in the late 1100s from this castle for a period of time. Now, it's mostly crumbled ruins, as many feudal castles are today. But again, very different than the other chateaux you've seen from the Loire, in the Loire. Pick different kinds of castles. You're going to run into a lot of them that remind you of Chenonceau and Chambord that I showed you before after a while. This one's entirely different, and I love the town of Chinon. Nearby, though, 10 minutes away, are the greatest gardens in the Loire Valley, and there are many great gardens in the Loire Valley. And I list 4 chateaux that specialize in their gardens. You should consider those if you are a gardener. Some of them you've you've never heard of before, Villandry here that I'm showing you now is probably one you have heard of. It's just beautiful, and it's close to Chinon. Makes an easy day trip. The chateau of Azay-le-Rideau, built at the same time as Chenonceau, the first one that I showed you arcing over the river. This one's built on a reflecting pond. People with lots of money, often thrown in jail afterwards when the king realized they were embezzling money. This was the treasurer of the king at the time, in Azay-le-Rideau. I have this one. I wouldn't visit this chateau if I'd visited Chenonceau because it's a similar time and place, and the furnishings would remind you of them, of each other, except that they do a sound and light show every night of the year here. And it reminds me, it's a good one, it's fun, it extends your trip until 10 o'clock at night to go to sound and light shows. You're still rolling after dinner. And many chateaux, several, not many, chateaux in the Loire Valley have these sound and light shows that are generally fun and worthwhile places to go. Usually get some history. You walk through fireplace-lit rooms, or fires are going on in the rooms at night, and it's an entirely different experience than at daytime. All right, that's the Loire Valley. Two different bases for hotels, Chinon and Amboise, and very different chateaux from each. Many more chateaux are described in the guidebook than I could show you today. Now we're heading south to one of my favorite regions in France, stopping on our way. It's about a 5-hour drive, 6-hour train ride from the Loire Valley to the Dordogne region. Halfway there, we'll stop in Oradour-sur-Glane. June 10th, 1944, the Nazis rounded up, or the SS rounded up everybody in this village of Oradour-sur-Glane, and looking like this in the day and age, it was the end of the light rail line, trolley line from the big city of Limoges, you know it from the China, and machine gunned and burned everybody. Killed the entire village. There had been rumors of resistance activity in the area. Nothing was proven. But a few days before June 10th, 1944, the landings at the D-Day beaches had occurred, and there was a certain paranoia in Germany amongst the leadership at the time. It's not unusual that villages like this in Italy and in France, and then today, lessons still learned, right? Bosnia, not that long ago, were entirely destroyed. What's unusual here in the case of Oradour-sur-Glane, the village we're looking at, is that they left it exactly as they found it on June 10th. It's a monument, so we don't forget. You can walk through the village. I've done a sort of a self-guided tour, and it's bigger than you think. 642 people. Need a lot of shops, shoemakers, sewing machines you'll see, cars rusted out on the corners, light rail lines rusted out above your head, overhead wire. It's powerful memory of another look at the impact of war. D-Day beaches tend to be sort of something we might celebrate because it was such a victory. Here is the sobering result that many people endured during World War II. 2 hours later, though, you get down here to this area that a lot of Americans find is their favorite part of France. When I guided tours, I think the Dordogne region, named for the river that you can see rolling straight down center in the image, is that area. It is glorious. It's beautiful, characterized, what do I want to say, highlighted by medieval villages right on the river like Baynac, medieval castles like Castelnau. This one has a beautiful 100 Years' War museum in it. Catapults, every room has something new, crossbows, and information provided brilliantly in English. Kids love this place. This is a region really, everywhere I've gone so far, they like the Chateau of the Loire Valley. Mont Saint-Michel's a hit with kids. The Dordogne in particular, because Rick's favorite thing to do with me ever since we were traveling together in 25 years is to take this canoe trip. We've done it a few times on TV. And you can take the canoe trip downriver an hour if you want, or 2 hours. You can stretch it as long as you want. And stop, pull your canoe over, and go up and visit. That's Castelnau. That's the 100 Years' War chateau that I mentioned to you before. And it's really across the river and down the river from the Chateau of Baynac that was the French side. This was the British side. If you've heard of Michael Crichton's book, Timeline, or seen the movie, it's sort of fanciful, this is where it takes place. These are the two castles that are being fought over, right? It's very romantic. The center of the area is the town of Sarlat. If you don't have a car, if you have a car, I'd sleep in one of the villages on the river. I really would, which is only a few miles away. If you don't, use the transportation base of Sarlat, S-A-R-L-A-T. The entire town had cars removed from it in 1962. Now think about this, Americans. In 1962, the Minister of the Interior of the country of France saw the value of this town of 10,000 people to be such that he thought this would be a tragedy to let cars run on the streets and through the squares, etc. I'm making a law. It's called the Law of Malroy, André Malroy, and I'm removing cars from the streets of this insignificant rural, I mean, really, it's nowhere on the route of, it's way away from normal travel, is what I want to say. And the city today, then, celebrates Wednesdays, that same square, and all the pedestrian-only streets with a market that seems to occupy every possible square inch of pedestrian zone. Arrive on a Tuesday night or a Friday night and wake up early with your shutter making noise outside to the setting up of the market and celebrate it. Our tour spends a whole day just doing that. We have 3 days on our Paris and South France tour so that we can devote a day or half day fully to this market. Remember, this is the area of foie gras, stuffed geese liver and duck liver, walnuts, truffles, and reasonable cuisine. The Dordogne region you're in now is one of the best deals for hotels and eating out, precisely because it is so rural and hard to get to. All right. It's also the most popular or the most famous of the sightseeing reasons to come to the Dordogne is to see its prehistoric cave art. There's nowhere else in the world where you can get this education in prehistoric man from 14,000 years or older. There's a museum in Les Azy near the town of Sarlat. Cars are almost essential, although there are some minivan operators that do it for you, and taxis or bikes are tough because it's very hilly. But you get around the best way that you can. I give you many options in the book. Start at the Museum of Prehistoric History, and then wander into one of these shelters to understand this is why there are so many caves here, the limestone cliffs, and this is typical residence of where the cavemen lived. They didn't live in the caves, but lived under the shelters. That caves like this with so much limestone and the climate of the Dordogne Valley created, that's why we have so many caves where they would wander in 65 yards sometimes. So be ready. Bring a sweater, because these caves are cold, and if it, acrophobia, is that the one where, claustrophobia. I get my phobias confused. And if that's a cross you bear, I wouldn't do most of these caves. Some of them are bigger, but they're generally pretty small spaces where they went in the pitch of dark. They'll explain to you the little lamps that they made to paint with. Because it's prehistory, you don't know why or who did these. Were they sort of preachers or religious leaders? We don't know why, but the history is astonishing. Look at how good. This is from Lascaux, one of the caves that you can visit as a copy cave. All the other 4 are original cave art. But it's all, what's always stunning to me in these caves is how good the art is from 15,000 years ago. That's very realistic. And then you think of medieval art, right, designed for the church with Jesus and the baby, or the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus looking like, it's nothing realistic. Like cardboard cutouts from the Middle Ages, art from that era. So the ability to paint 3 dimensions on like a 2-dimensional surface seemed to have been figured out so long ago. It's striking, and it's worth booking well ahead. You can book these caves on the internet, and you need to. My favorite cave, the Font de Gaume cave, just went, if you look at our website, we update our guidebooks on our website, they just reduced by 2/3 the number of people they allow in on a daily basis. Obvious reasons, the breadth of the people was noticed to be creating problems faster than they thought for the wear and tear of the cave art inside. There's 3 others, though, that where you should have no trouble getting into. You can book ahead, Font de Gaume. It's the best of the original cave art that you can visit. I like Rouffignac also, and that one doesn't have too many limits. It's a bigger, more open cave. You'd see what I meant if you went. But Font de Gaume, book well ahead. Hours show up very early because they keep a number of tickets for more. All of these do for the morning of, for the early risers and the people who like set up tents for concert tickets the night before. For you early risers, you can sometimes get into the caves that way. All right. This one is from Font de Gaume, this horse. Remarkable to see these caves. Then, that's the joy of the Dordogne region. You'll eat well, try some foie gras, try the truffle omelets. The hotels are reasonable. This is a place to try some fancy hotels. You'll see cave art, hop on a canoe for a day. Even if you don't have a car, they'll pick you up in the town of Sarlat and drop you at the other end of that river and then pick you up again. That's a lovely thing on getting out of the area if you don't have a car. Then travel 5 hours south to the city, the largest fortified walled city in Europe of Carcassonne. And again, stop on the way. I list hill towns and the city of Albi on your way to distract yourself. Arrive after 5 and find your way over this perfectly feudal moat, double moat, triple-walled, fortified city where 6,000 people lived within during the Middle Ages, Carcassonne. Arrive late. You can do a wall walk in the morning or at night. 80% of the perimeter you can cover free by walking their walls. Spend the night. Oh, have cassoulet first. That's right. Almost forgot. This is only in this Languedoc. This is the Spanish influence almost. We're into that. We're very much at the foothills of the Pyrenees here in Carcassonne. So you're near the Mediterranean too, near Barcelona, not far. This is a duck. Cassoulet is a duck, white bean, white sausage or dark sausage stew that's kind of like fancy beanies and weenies. Something like that. It's not for people on a diet, you know, it's really rich. It's really rich. It needs a strong, rugged red wine to stand up to it. They have it. The wines from Corbière are rough and rugged. It's a beautiful mix. Have dinner, the specialty of the area, then get out and do the same walk. I do a night version of my day walk in Carcassonne. It's so beautifully lit. The French are great at lighting their monuments at night with the sodium lighting, then get down below to the river below. Look at this. It looks like Camelot. It's like Mont Saint-Michel. You have to spend the night, and if you just visit these towns from 10 to 2 in the middle of the day, you will miss all of that quieter and subtly soft-lit beauty with the sodium lighting. Carcassonne. One night. Nearby Carcassonne requires a car. There's one person who does minivan tours to get up into the Pyrenees Mountains. There are 10 Cathar castles, about 5 of which you can tour today. This is my favorite. This is Père Repetus. This is about 3,000 or 4,000 feet high into the Pyrenees Mountains. It's a good hour and a half to 2 hour narrow, windy road drive from Carcassonne. But what I like, and these are Cathar castles, and if you read Dan Brown's book, Da Vinci Code, he gets into this whole idea that I don't have time for to talk to you today, but that the Cathar people held a secret about Jesus. It's a fascinating read. There's even a better book to read called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. If you're into the Cathar people, I mentioned it in the guidebook. This is where it all took place. It was a BBC producer who created that book and wrote it from his various vacations in this area. But these castles and the Cathar people, who are the only Christian people to have had a crusade preached against them by the Pope with the connivance of the French king, is a remarkable history, and visiting the castles is a sensational event from a scenic perspective and from a historic perspective, and it takes you to one of my favorite towns on the Mediterranean, which is Collioure. This is your vacation from your vacation, if that's what you need at this point. Collioure is a small town. It was a favorite of Pablo Picasso, George Braque, and a couple of other. Henri Matisse also spent time here. There's nothing to do in this beautiful little town except relax on the beach, hang out in the old town, and maybe day trip into Barcelona because it's not very far away and the train takes you there. If you only have a couple of weeks, maybe you're done and you'll fly out of Barcelona. That's a nice Western France trip right there. And there's the map that shows where we are right now. So we've come from Paris, Normandy, there's Mont Saint-Michel. Remember the distance, it's an hour to Giverny, another hour on. They're almost all these hour segments, and 4 hours from Mont Saint-Michel to the Loire Valley, 5 down to the Dordogne. Now we're about 4 more hours down to the Carcassonne area. And Barcelona would be just about there, just across the border really into Spain. Good trip. But now we're heading to the most popular region in France outside of Paris for travelers, the stunning arid landscape that Peter Mayle made famous in his guidebooks. But it was already famous anyway because of the lavender and the beautiful monuments that the region of Provence provides. It's such an interesting area that it took a whole guidebook for us just to describe it. So you need more time here. I think 3 days in the Dordogne is really essential for so much to do and see there. 1 in Carcassonne is really fine to get a sample of that area. I assume you will return. 3 days, 4 days for Normandy, a couple for nights, I should say, for the Loire Valley, and you're doing well. Provence here, minimum of 3. I'd go a week at least. It's worth a vacation on your own. The airport at Marseille and Nice offer quick access to this area and some very good deals. Depends on the airline company you're working with, right? It's also the Mediterranean cuisine, the mix of olives and grapes, spices and herbs. You can't avoid smelling the thyme and the rosemary as you walk through the countryside anywhere in this region. We love it. It's sunny 350 days a year here. Yes, and it provides a nice combination, unusual in France, of interesting cities and beautiful rural villages all in one area, about the size of King County. Amazing. This slice of France is about the size of King County. Here is my favorite base for urbanites. This is Arles, the city of, they pronounce it like a pirate would. Arles. A-R-L-E-S. Don't pronounce that last S usually, unless there's an exception. This is the Rhone River flowing out into the Mediterranean. And this is a slide that I just got off the internet because I'm not up at this elevation. But here's what I want to show you that's astonishing about Arles and that I love. It's 50,000 people. Good city to travel through, manageable. Here's my favorite museum of antique Arles that you should visit first. Check into your hotel, start here, and then look at how similar. This is Arles in the Roman era, 2,000 years ago. Model of the city right there, city. It hasn't grown much past its borders. In fact, commonly the populations of these towns is even less than it was 2,000 years ago under Roman rule. It's not unusual. Isn't that wild? I love that. I don't know why, but I do. I love it. Okay, so get out and see the Museum of Antique Arles. And then wander. They have models of how the Roman theaters used to work. The best examples of Roman theaters that you see today are in southern France. I'll show you momentarily. Aqueducts and the like. And you see that huge stage model, the size of this stage that I'm on, of the whole city. I love that. I wish Italy would do that, where you can get a sense of what it looked like 2,000 years ago. Then you wander through and you see what's left of the theater today. They still do musical events in that theater. In its height, it held 10,000 people. Today, it's about 3,000 people. But the Roman arena in Arles, the Forum, or the Colosseum, if you want to call it, of Arles, 25,000 people, is beautifully restored. Today, they use it for bullfights most commonly. You're in the south of France. And it's a fun event to go to because almost never do they kill the bull in France. Almost never. And it's not easy to find a bullfight. I mean, it's most commonly, in June and September, I think, that you'll find bullfights. Anyway, the arena and various other Roman monuments are really worth a lot of your time in traveling to Arles, but so are the squares. This is the city life in Provence that I love so much. Public squares, markets every day of the week in these squares. Whether it's in Avignon, Aix-en-Provence, or, and I'm using this case, Arles, they're all the same. They're great. What they're selling is largely the same. The spirit, the life of this southern France culture that people stop, slow down, have a cafe au lait on your favorite square. This is the Place du Forum, and then move on. And in Arles, you have the unique opportunity to walk in the footsteps of this artist that many of us are moved by. And the more you learn about Vincent van Gogh, the more you will be moved by him if you are not yet. He led a fascinating and tragic life. His art that you like mostly, that you recognize, was entirely influenced by his move to southern France from Paris. He was raised in Holland, then educated artistically, you could say in part, in Montmartre in Paris. Then he wanted to get out of the rainy, cold weather, and he went to the south, and it bowled him over. And it blew him away so much, along with the winds of the area, that his art took this unbelievable turn. And you can't see original art of Vincent van Gogh's. Maybe one day they talk about it in Arles, which is a shame because it's so foundational to his artistic style. But what you can do that arguably is even better, because you can't do it anywhere else in the world, is walk in his footsteps and stand where he stood and see Starry Night, a copy of it, over the Rhone River. That's where he set up his easel to paint this painting. And there are 15 stops that I give you on the footsteps of Vincent van Gogh in a walking tour that also describes his history as a human being and his art and his relationship with his brother and other people and his ear-cutting episode, etc. It's a fascinating story that I've already spent probably too much time on, but obviously I'm engaged in it. One of my bed and breakfast owners is an 85-year-old American who moved to Arles and owns a bed and breakfast that I list in the guidebook, and he turned me on to Vincent van Gogh and informed me for so much. Anyway. It's the Mas du Petit Grave if you want to stay there, but he's full most of the time. Half an hour north of Arles is an entirely different look at a Provençal city. On the Rhone River still is the city of Avignon. And what you're looking at here and what I'm standing on here is le Pont d'Avignon, from nursery rhyme Sur le Pont d'Avignon on y danse. This is twice the size of the city of Arles, with almost nothing worth seeing except the beautiful back streets and squares of the city. Avignon is a lovely city. It's cleaner than Arles. It's less gritty. It feels French. It feels like a mini Paris, whereas Arles feels somewhat Italian when you're down there. Just half an hour apart. Arles has the Roman ruins and the great street markets. Avignon has more upscale squares. And its one site to lay claim to fame to is the Vatican. In the 1300s, the French kings, in connivance with the Pope, who was French at the time, moved the Vatican from Italy, which was a mess at this time, to Avignon. And this is the result of that. It's the castle, the palace of the popes, they call it. And it's where, for 78 years, the popes would reside outside of Italy. It's a remarkable building from the outside because it's obviously very defensive. Those popes weren't so secure in their day and age. There's no window within any reach of a stone or a brick or something like that. And on the inside, you can spend a lot of money to tour vacant, vapid rooms with an audio guide and even triple the amount of time you spend. This is probably, I think, unless you are a historian, in which case it's a rich, important site, one of the most overrated sites there is in France. Because you can enjoy much from the outside. There's very little on the inside compared to what you've seen before in the way of chateaux in the Loire Valley or the Dordogne. Still, it's an interesting visit, if you want. And there's really precious little else important to see on the inside in Avignon. Nearby, though, Avignon offers great public transportation access. If you don't have a car, it is a better base than Arles. Arles has better hotel prices and restaurants, so maybe you're going to take the shuttle half-an-hour train up to Avignon and move from there. Buses and local trains connect Avignon then with some of these Roman ruins that I've mentioned before that Provence, southern France, is so famous for. This is the greatest in my opinion. This is my favorite Roman ruin, the Pont du Gard. This is the 2,000-year-old aqueduct that carried over 44,000 gallons of water a day along a channel 30 miles long to the important city of Nîmes. And they had this one obstacle to cover, the Gard River and its gorge below. And they built this aqueduct, did the Romans, before the invention of mortar. So all those stones are just cut into place and wedged in just perfectly. On a regular basis in October, there are huge rains, and cities in Provence are flooded and bridges are washed away. Not the Pont du Gard, not the other Roman bridges that you'll see throughout the region either that are much smaller. Astonishing, before mortar. Isn't that incredible? At the Pont du Gard, it's worth a lot of your time. It's a bizarre entry system they have now. Pack your car full of people because they just charge you 15 euros for the car. If there's one of you, 15 euros. If you have 10 kids, 15 euros. Pack them on. It used to be a per person, then everything else is free. There's quite a bit to do beyond just seeing the aqueduct. There are museums, there are displays, there are kids' areas to play and to understand the aqueduct better. It really all goes into a good package of helping you understand how Romans did things in general, let alone the importance of water to Roman life and how far they advanced that. You can get right down to the river. You can go swim in the river if you want to. And touch that aqueduct. You used to be able to climb across the very top of it. It's 170 feet high, 900 feet long. I'll go back to that image. And you used to be able to go right across the top here. There's no guardrail, and about every 10 feet, there's open manhole covers to aerate the water. And until about 10 years ago, you could do that, and there was no sign suggesting that maybe you shouldn't be doing this. And the attitude in France is really, if you fall, it's your own fault. Very different approach to legal responsibility than the United States. Now they've made it off limits except on specially guided tours. But you can visit it on specially guided tours, and it's worth it. Here's where acrophobia matters. Forget it. The last time, I have to tell you, the last time I was there, this is really the truth, a guy rode a mountain bike across the top. Not the last time I was there, the last time you could just wander across. You imagine that? All right, enough of that. We move on. Roman ruins like the Pont du Gard, there are so many of them. The great theater, the greatest Roman theater in existence that I know of in Europe today is the one in Orange here, which is just near Châteauneuf-du-Pape, the wine town, just a little bit north of Avignon. Here's the reason why this is so famous, is it's so well preserved. The stage wall is left intact. And what happened to Roman ruins commonly is people pillaged them for cheap stone in the Middle Ages. It was easier to go to Roman ruins and take the stones out and build your houses from that than going to a quarry and digging them out. This was just too big and too massive to mess with, or for whatever reason, I don't really know. The theater in Orange was left intact. It's easy to visit by public transit or car. Nearby, after the Roman ruins in the great cities of Arles and Avignon, if you're driving, I would base myself in a village and day trip into those cities probably. It's just so much easier, and there's so many great hotels and small villages to see. This one is Les Baux. It's about 20 minutes from, 30 minutes from Avignon, 15 minutes from Arles. And it's one of the great hill towns of the area. Go early or late because crowds midday will trample a lot of the beauty of this town. Get up there first thing in the morning like I am here, and there's very few people. Catapults, the kings, the lords in the area would rule from above. You'll see catapults, trebuchets, and much more. And then you look down to the scenery below once you're above. And the modern hill town, which dates from the 1400s, right? Modern hill town is there for you and filled with trinket-selling shops, but also beautiful streets and some interesting monuments to see nearby in Les Baux. There are hotels I list in the town. This is the this is the area that Peter Mayle, just east of here, made popular in his book, A Year in Provence, and his other guidebook, or other books that he wrote. He renovated a British businessman who renovated a castle. This is so many hill towns. This kind of the Tuscany is this area called the Luberon, just, again, just east of Avignon and Les Baux. If you were getting into a hill town and not really worried about seeing cathedrals or churches or castles, this place was made for you because it's just simply beautiful. And this is an old slide, so it's washed out, but this is the ochre cliffs that are just all around the reddish. You can see the color of the village of Roussillon here. You're looking at, it looks like Roussillon if you spell it out. It's one of my favorite hill towns in the Luberon region of Provence. The Luberon is just a small department within the area of Provence. And it's right on your way to the French Riviera, so it's really worthwhile to make a stop on your way. Get out of the cities. Don't just see the Roman ruins and the cities that Provence is famous for. Stop for a night or two if you can. And if you have a car, maybe base yourselves out of one of these villages. Right? There are many of them. I list 6 or 7 of them that I love. This one is probably my favorite, Roussillon. And it's because it's like Bryce Canyon nearby, walking through these ochre cliffs that until World War II, after which synthetic ochre was found, they used to mine it from here. The old village of Roussillon is a lovely stop on your day. It's all pedestrian only in the center part of the city. And spending the night in one of these little villages really adds, again, like so many times I've said today, a great aspect onto your trip. I'm going to move it along now because I'm doing my typical thing of taking too much time. The end of our eastern part of this trip, 3 hours away from Provence, is the French Riviera, and the highlight of which is Nice, right here. The center in the French Riviera, from about 60 miles from Antibes to Monaco, is that strip of the French Riviera of which Nice is the capital. It's the logical place for you to fly in and out of. The airport is just down here. It's a landing strip, a landfill. Then you're greeted by palm trees and English-speaking people. The British were some of the first tourists. This town is entirely really developed from tourism in the 1800s and 1900s, the basis of its economy such as it was. Now it's the 5th largest city in France. Recently, inventions like this light rail line have made the city a joy to travel through. And squares that used to have cars traveling across them every which way have been cut off to cars and left only to pedestrian in downtown Nice. It's a lovely place to wander the Promenade des Anglais. And this reminds me, this is the winter time. We're about for next year to launch a tour of 7 days of the French Riviera, but only off-season, because the weather is so nice and it's worth your time and the crowds are so low that we think it's worthwhile to visit that, but do it on your own in the winter sometime. Wander the Promenade des Anglais winter and then come in the summer. The beaches are pebbly, the locals don't mind. They're also not very modest. You can find all sorts of new uses for your zoom lens, as Rick likes to say, in Nice. Wander into the old city. Wander up to the old castle. Look down into the old city that looks more Italian than French because it was until the 1860s, part of the Italian Principality. And so much Italian cuisine and colors and style take place here on display for you. The Chagall Museum. Nice is more than just a pretty city on the beach to look at. The several museums that you'll find in the city are really worth your time and energy. The best is the Chagall Museum. Marc Chagall lived here in the 50s and 60s and dedicated 17 paintings just to this museum, to which he donated them. And they are remarkably beautiful. And we lead a guided tour in our Provence book of this museum. Jean Openshaw does it and does a brilliant job describing the importance of color to Marc Chagall. Nearby, the Matisse Museum, where Henri Matisse, a few years earlier, overlapped with Marc Chagall, created his art and started to change the style of art with modern art, with the Fauvist movement. His museum lacks a certain ability to grab my attention. There are a few works of art that I like in this museum, but the Matisse Museum is kind of hard to get to. It's a little bit less central than the Chagall Museum, but it's worthwhile to those who are fans of his. If you're not a big fan, I think you can skip the Matisse Museum and focus on other of the sites in Nice. We do a variety of guided walks in our guidebook, like the Promenade des Anglais, and walks through Old Nice as well. If it's sandy beaches you want, travel half an hour away by train. This is a place not to use your car, by the way. To the sandy beaches of Antibes. Look at the city. Those are the Alps, by the way, in the backdrop. That's how close you are on the French Riviera. Antibes is famous for its Picasso Museum and sandy beaches. This is my favorite Picasso museum and modern art museum, really because the art that he has here is this colorful art, which many of it has a sort of a seafood or sea creatures theme to it. You'll see a little crab down here and throughout his art. It's playful, it's more understandable to me in Picasso, and it's right on the water. Antibes is famous for that. If it's not the big city of Nice that you want, Antibes is a good destination, but even a better small town destination, just 10 minutes away, it's Villefranche-sur-Mer that I'm looking at here, where that's very Italianesque, much like Nice, but just on a much smaller scale, where you can walk from the downtown along the sandy shore and even have dinner on the beach. Day trip into Nice from Villefranche-sur-Mer. Enjoy the museums and the hustle and bustle of the city that way, but come back to Villefranche-sur-Mer for your nights. A lot of our readers have enjoyed that. Another 15 minutes, that's only about 10 minutes east of Nice. Right to the border of Italy lies Monaco. The Principality of Monaco, 2,000 people, 30,000 local residents in a city an area about the size of Edmonds. who are really local Monegasques, as they say. I can't pronounce that very well. The important sights to see in Monaco, there are 4 different neighborhoods, of which 3 really matter to you. One is Prince Rainier's Palace. Now it's Prince Albert's Palace since Prince Rainier passed. And this is kind of fun. I wouldn't go on the inside of it. The changing the guard at 11:55 every day is kind of fun to see. And it reminds me that priorities being what they are in Monaco, that they still do a changing of the guard. And this country is not part of Italy nor part of France, even though the currency is the euro and the sewage, they say, comes from France. It's very tiny. It's an anachronism. But they do a changing of the guard, even though there are more people in the Philharmonic in Monaco than in the military. I'm not even sure anybody's in the military in Monaco anymore. Most people know of it for its famous casino. Right? That was built in the early 1800s and really changed the economy, both of the French Riviera and of Monaco. Come here at night. The casino rooms don't open until 2 anyway if you really want to gamble a little bit. It costs 10 euros to get in and dress as nicely as you can and hope they'll let you in. It's hard to get a pin. You need a tie if you're an American, if you're a man. Otherwise, I think you'll get in, but no shorts, nothing like that. And it's after 2 o'clock that the rooms start opening. The slot machines are now closed. If you've ever been there before or heard of them, they were free, but they are now a thing of the past. But I like going at night because you can get to Nice or Antibes or Villefranche easily from Monaco. And it's just so beautiful in the evening. It's a prettier city in the evening than the daytime. Okay, we've made it down to here, and I've got to scoot my way through eastern France back to Paris in about 15 minutes. Here we go. Leaving straight north from Nice. Remember, good airport Nice to fly out of. That's already a great trip, and I've just described our Paris in the south of France trip that we do in 15 days. Just heading due north, diving right into the Alps, across the gorge of Verdun, through that Massif Central mountain range, up into the French Alps, the high French Alps, stopping to see the 2 faces or 2 looks at the Alps. First, at this lakefront city of Annecy, A-N-N-E-C-Y. It's a city, a lovely city, and one of my favorite things to do is to bike halfway up the lake and take a lake steamer back and roll my bike onto that lake steamer. It's like Green Lake, only longer. Bike path all the way up. Don't double back on your bike. You've already seen it. Roll it onto the lake ferry. I give you the schedules. It's a great half day of easy pedaling and lovely experience and get you out of your car, out of the train. Otherwise, wander into the back streets of this beautiful city. 50,000 people. I think it's maybe the prettiest city I know of in France. At the base of the Alps, spend the night if you can, because like everywhere in France, particularly glowing on the water, the city of Annecy is lovely. Most people's goal in coming to this part of France is to get as high as they can. That was unintentional. And Chamonix allows you to do so. This is the ultimate. This city was invented for mountain in the late 1700s, when mountains were not anymore perceived as obstacles, but you climbed them and went to them because they were there. Chamonix, Mont Blanc, gained its name. And here is the highest point in Europe, 15,700 feet, I think, Mont Blanc. And every street in Chamonix is named for a mountain climber. This was the site of the first Winter Olympics in 1924. And you can get up to the top and do one of the most amazing border crossings by taking this gondola to 7,000 feet, transferring to another gondola, and then getting to 12,000 feet. And climbing to how they built these buildings, I don't know. And how these skiers ski down on glaciers all the way back down, I don't know either. But it's a fascinating look at winter life at the most sort of prestigious place, or among them, in Europe to ski. And it's year-round skiing, of course, from Chamonix. If you have courage and time, this is the greatest single alpine thing I know that you can do in Europe, which is to take the little teacup cars from 12,000 feet, by the way, dangling with your partner for 45 minutes into Italy. You used to have to bring your passport until the European Union resolved that issue, and then double back. It's a remarkable ride. Double back and go halfway down to about 4,000 feet, and then do my favorite walk along the top of the it's not, you can see the cairns locating your walk. It's a relatively manageable walk. And then take the narrow gauge train down from there. You don't really gain or lose too much elevation at all, but you're most of the way down, but you're still above the valley and getting terrific mountain views. That is a heck of a way to spend your day in the French Alps. 2.5 hours closer toward Paris lies my region of Burgundy, crisscrossed with dreamy canals. This is really profoundly French France, dotted with castles. It's about wine. This is the city of Beaune, one of my favorite towns. It's about 25,000 people. Beaune, B-E-A-U-N-E is. It's the center of winemaking in the Burgundy area, or the focus of it, I should say. The vineyards grow right to the doors of the town, so it's easy to walk right into the vineyards from Beaune. The hospice, the Hotel Dieu, is unusual as a medieval monument to a hospital from the Middle Ages. The plague and the 100 Years' War rendered so many people in such state of misery that they built a hospital for them in the 1400s. Now, they were better off left outside in ditches because this was before we understood contagion and such. Nonetheless, it's an interesting look inside at how people were cared for in the Middle Ages. So it adds to medieval villages and adds to churches and gives you one more look at medieval Europe. Getting out and riding a bicycle, I mentioned before, I love it in Burgundy. There's a great bike rental place. You can go just as far as you want. The towns are very close together. And I came through twice, or get out in your car. I give you several wine roads to do, tasting places. This is where my house is with my parents, so I know this area well. If you're interested in wine tasting, we'll get past those images you may have of the haughty Burgundian or Bordeaux winemaker, and I think you'll find it's a lovely, welcoming area. Just north by 3 hours of Burgundy is the Alsace. Entirely different look. Now we're into, this is the eastern side of France, right? German-influenced France, where sauerkraut is the main dish, covered with fine wine sauces. How about that Germanic Franco blend, where everybody's last name is German and given name is French? Right? Okay. And where the architecture looks like this. This is the city of Colmar. But all the cities kind of have this half-timbered Germanic look to them. Beautiful stone churches that you can wander through in the city of Colmar, about 80,000 people. It's also the capital of the Alsatian wine country. The stones that they quarry from the Vosges Mountains nearby. Give it that, back up, Steve, that rose kind of yellow tone, beautiful. The museums that are possible. Auguste Bartholdi, the sculptor who built the Statue of Liberty, has a museum dedicated to himself here in Colmar. How many of you knew that? The Unterlinden Museum that you're staring at here probably has Rick Steves' favorite single work of art, the Polyptych by Matthias Grunewald. It's a remarkable work of art, 5 different panels it takes to show you this gripping image in its famous museum. Then knocking at the doors of the city of Colmar, which makes really a lovely Alsatian base for you, is the wine road of the Alsace. Friendly, welcoming. Here's a place where they're eager to meet Americans and try to convince you that their wines are interesting. All their wines are white. The one red they make isn't worth worrying about. Get into the villages. How about that? And enjoy the villages, and then head back to Paris. Well, I'll wrap this talk up, stopping halfway at the battlefields at Verdun, where 800,000 people died in World War I in one battlefield area. In the War of 1914 and 1918, the war to end all wars, the ability of this area to show you World War I, about which Americans know really relatively little, is astonishing. Take time for the battlefields at Verdun. Halfway back to Paris, from there it's about 2 hours. Back by bullet train, you can stop in the champagne-happy city of Reims with its famous cathedral, which now has a 45-minute every hour train to it, thanks to the new TGV service. Famous is this region, is this city, Reims, R-E-I-M-S, as being the capital of Champagne, one of the capitals of Champagne. And it's very different than seeing wine caves. Tour the camp. I list 3 or 4 that I really like, where I think you get a good value for touring Champagne cellars. This is the heart of it. These are the vineyards. It's the only place in France you can call it in the world, really, Champagne. And then head back into Paris. This is where to end your trip. The city that is flat with a river running through it. The beauty in Paris is man-made. Now, we have a book devoted just to Paris. I will be very quick. I do talks just on Paris, and I devote an hour and a half just to that one city that I can only have a few minutes to tell you about today. What I can tell you is book your room now. It's popular. It's a busy year in Paris. Other parts of France, not so much, but Paris is popular. It's a small central city area where you want to do your sightseeing. Just to give you a sense of the scale, the Eiffel Tower is here, and the Louvre Museum here. This is 90% of all your sightseeing on this map. This is about an hour walk at a pretty relaxed pace along the river. So you see the scale of the central city is completely manageable, unlike Berlin or London that are much greater scale for connecting the dots and seeing the places that you want to see. The subway system, nonetheless, gets you everywhere you want to go. It's a spaghetti network of subway stops that works very logically. It's safe, it's clean. You want to buy a pass if you're staying a week? Maybe. But for sure, you want these 10 ride tickets. They sell a children's version, Okay, and then adult version. They give you a good deal on the subway. You buy them, and they get groups of 10. Divide them between your wife and you or your travel partner. You don't have to each use your own. And you can buy them at almost every metro stop. Not all of them sell them anymore. And then get going. These open-decked buses are relatively new in Paris, and they give a great, if you've never been before, a great overview of the city, because the shame in Paris on the metro system, good as it is that you're underground. Seeing the city from particularly these top-deck buses, several companies do these tours. They run them on circuits. Every 10 minutes, the bus connects on this one route. It's not particularly if you have kids, it's not a bad thing to do for your first day in Paris. And so you can, I went to try to run into the Louvre Museum or the Orsay Museum and spend a lot of time there. I'd use it as an overview of the city and get out and see things maybe like the Eiffel Tower or the Arc de Triomphe and things that you can see in a little bit faster time in using that sort of open bus top kind of itinerary for seeing the city. Everybody wants a museum pass who's going to Paris for any length of time. 2, 4, and 6 days. They're time savers because you can skip the line. You still have to go through the metal detectors at museums and palaces as well. They're not just for museums. They're for tower climbs, like the Notre Dame's Tower, for Versailles Palace. The pass covers you there. That's a 22 euro entry to do all the sites at Versailles alone. This pass covers that. So you'll save money if you do much sightseeing. Again, 2, 4, and 6 days consecutive. Just buy 2 days maybe to start with, but it's cheaper on a per day basis the more you buy. So they try to get you into buying the 6 days version and then get going and save time in line by not having to stand in line to buy tickets. Get out and see the central part of the city. This is how I'd always start any trip to Paris, is on the Ile de la Cité and the Ile Saint-Louis, the historic center of Paris, where the city was founded. Right? So the rivers provided a safe place for fishing and to pull the drawbridges up. So this is where the city naturally would start, on the Seine River. Start with its greatest, or arguably one of its greatest monuments, Notre Dame Cathedral. It took 144 years to build. You can tour it in half an hour. It's astonishing to think that the average person in the Middle Ages lived to be about 30, 39 years old, but it took them 140 years to build this. Imagine the person who started this chapel or whatever foundations of the church, knowing his grandchildren wouldn't see its completion. It's a different mentality, a different perspective, and good guides will train you about and teach you about the medieval perspective. Today, if my son doesn't get on the internet in 3 seconds, he's upset. Somehow there's a difference happening here. Okay, so inside you can see the beautiful stained glass window in the interior of Notre Dame, and then see the zenith of Gothic architecture just a few hundred yards away at the Sainte-Chapelle. Here, the triumph of stained glass art is on display. Oh, what happened? There we are. Is on display for you. If the purpose of Gothic architecture is to stretch the church taller and fill its windows with art that tell people the stories of the Bible, because we weren't reading in this day and age, in the 1200s. This church was built in a little over 3 years. 6,000 square feet of stained glass, almost no walls left. It is the ultimate success, the ultimate triumph, really, of Gothic architecture. Sainte-Chapelle was built to house the crown of thorns that St. Louis had miraculously found or had given to him by researchers in North Africa, I believe, at the time. And it's a fitting home. Now, the crown of thorns are no longer there. They are located in Notre Dame and only on display rarely. But here you can do a tour. If you use our guidebook, which I think we do, Jean and Rick do a great job describing the symbolism, because today we're illiterate on the symbolism of these windows and how and what they all described. Then moving on to see just get outdoors. You've seen the Notre Dame and Sainte-Chapelle, see the riverbanks, wander into the Luxembourg Gardens and relax for your afternoon. And allow yourself this time in Paris parks. Parisian parks are lovely places just to hang out and watch life go by. On another day, start at the Louvre Museum. Your energy is best in the morning, so I really recommend going in the morning or later in the day. And I'll explain that to you shortly. It's a crowded museum. It opens at 9 most days, except Tuesday it's closed. So strategize your sightseeing well, right? Go at night. On Wednesday and Fridays, we do this on our Paris City tours. The museum is open till 9. No crowds after 5, trust me. If you have kids, it's much better. Get some afternoon rest in the hotel and go back out. Otherwise, do it first thing in the morning when your energy's good. Consider taking a guided tour. This is our guide right here. This is Elizabeth. She's a guide you can hire. She leads tours of the Louvre, and we use her on our tours as well. She leads the whole Paris tour a lot as well. They'll get you past the crowds as well and explain to you the remarkable array of art in this fine arts museum, from Hellenistic art, Winged Victory that you're looking at here from Greece, Venus de Milo from the Golden Age of Greece, another woman, a lot of women in the Louvre Museum, Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Why is she here? Now we know. The French king brought him north, and he packed his favorite paintings with him when he came north to end his life. Not to end his life, came north where he would end his life, in the Loire Valley. And the museum ends in the late 1800s with the coronation of Napoleon by David. The next step, chronologically, in art is taken over in the Orsay Museum. We'll talk about it in a moment. At the top of the hill, you can spend your afternoon after 3 hours in the Louvre Museum, wander up to the Arc de Triomphe, take the subway. It's a direct line from the Louvre Museum. Stare out at the great view to the other direction, then down. It's best at night to see the Champs-Élysées. That's what you're here for. It's a great afternoon combination with the Louvre in the morning. I like combining these things, but if I only have enough time to see the Champs-Élysées, go at night. If you have to choose night or day, it is so brilliant at night. There's no important sightseeing to do. The Arc de Triomphe is open until 11 o'clock most nights of the year, and wander down the very wide sidewalks, of the Champs-Élysées. Take our guided tour in the Paris book. It'll unleash quite a bit of information about the Champs-Élysées, and you'll find it's far more interesting than you otherwise would have known. Another day, go see the source of Impressionist art really in the city of Paris. This is Montmartre, the city it's the single hill in Paris where, until 1870, it was separate from Paris. So people could party like this and drink wine, and it was legal, and live the lives that they wanted to. Such was the lower rent and the lifestyle that it drew artists to the churches like Sacré-Cœur. Well, in the village, there was the guy I'm looking for, like Vincent van Gogh, who loved this life on Montmartre. Go spend a morning up on Montmartre, see the village that's still there today and reminds us a lot of how different it was and is today from the rest of Paris, even though today it's part of Paris. And see the Moulin Rouge. Don't go at night, it's not worth it, but see it from the outside and see the inspiration and understand that it meant to Toulouse-Lautrec. You'll also pass Auguste Renoir's home as well, and learn a lot about, in our guided walk, or with a local guide, of the history of the Impressionist art and the importance of the Montmartre area to it. Spend your afternoon then seeing the museums that house the art that Montmartre was so important in fostering. These guys hung out together. So did Pablo Picasso, by the way, who would take art a whole nother direction later. This is the Orsay Museum. Used to be a train station. Now it's a museum of Impressionist art. It's beautiful. It has Claude Monet, Paul Cézanne. It has almost everything that you want to see from the great masters of Impressionist art. How great is that, though, to see the stories in Montmartre, then see the art in the afternoon in museums, and then you can tour after seeing the Orsay Museum and seeing paintings of the Impressionists. Then you can go see the museum to the man who did for sculpture what Claude Monet did for painted art. Same era, Impressionist sculpture, Auguste Rodin. Right? His thinker, his art is on display. The museum's under renovation now, but you should be able to see a lot of the art. It's romantic art. It's the kind of art that the Impressionists loved to do. Lastly, you can wander through on another day in Paris, get past the museums and the churches, go into neighborhoods like the Marais district. Take our walking tour of the Marais, Paris's best preserved medieval district, the center for Jewish life yesterday and today. Understand life through the eyes of the Jewish culture now. There's a brilliant museum of Jewish history in this part of Paris, in the Marais district. Again, all walkable, not very far away from the river you are. The Modern Art Museum sort of caps this corner of Paris, this Marais district, where you can wander and see modern art from Andy Warhol to Roy Lichtenstein to anybody you want to see in the Pompidou Center. Save for the end of your trip. I like to save the Eiffel Tower for the end, and I'll do that for you today. This is the monument that works best for me at the end. And the lesson here is to go late in the day. There are two lessons. Go late in the day when the light changes and you can see the sunset from above. There's no time limit once you get up. It's open until about 10 o'clock at night usually. Depends on the time of year, so be careful. And then see Paris lights twinkle on. It really is the single greatest view you can have of Paris. What you need to do now, what you need to be aware of, is that the Eiffel Tower takes reservations for individuals. You can book online and save yourself 2 hours of line waiting if you don't book a reservation. That's huge. Think of that seriously. The problem is if the weather's good on another time, you're stuck with the time you have. It's one of those things. If you go late in the day, particularly the sun doesn't set like as in Seattle till very late in the day, and you're there in June, July, August, you probably won't have that bad of a line to go before sunset if you want to just judge when you go. Otherwise, book before you go. Right now, I'm aware that indefinitely one of the elevators is down at the Eiffel Tower making lines longer than usual. So for many people, and I'm going to give you the license, don't worry about going up it. Seeing it from the outside is brilliant. Seeing it from across the river is brilliant. Seeing it at night is sensational. There are other great views of Paris as well. If you can go up it, by all means do. It's great. If you can't, you'll be okay because there are other such great views of the city. But still go visit the tower, particularly at night. And that's what I have to describe to you about my trip to France. All of our guidebooks give you this information. Everything I said was provided information in our France book. We update our guidebooks by using our website. This is where you would find information on the one elevator in the Eiffel Tower, on the project at Mont Saint-Michel, on new restaurants or changed hotels that we know. Before you go, take our guidebooks, but use our website to update them. We do. If you're interested in a tour, it's $100 off. If you sign up before Monday, I'd love to see you some year, maybe on our new tour of the Provence and Riviera in the winter. There that is. Sign up for our newsletter. It's a great way of staying in touch with us. And I love finishing this talk with this notion that one of the things that turns me on most is getting cards and letters from people whose grandchildren told them they shouldn't be doing things like this. Traveling footloose and fancy-free on a fair budget, understanding that he or she who comes home with the most money doesn't win, enjoying the Promenade des Anglais in the winter on their own, or going on a tour because that's what suited them. They wanted that information that the guides gave them. Ultimately, though, they came back to France, not in spite of the French waiters, but because of them. Thank you very much, very much. And bon voyage to everybody. I'll be back at the Travel Center now for the next hour answering questions if I can help you. We have to move out for the next talk. Thanks for your attention.